In this video, we will talk about Zorin OS and why I don't fully recommend it to new users. And while we are looking at Zorin OS, we are comparing it sometimes to Linux Mint, which I have also opened up here so we can get a good understanding what are the differences and why I have my very special opinion about this. Let's start right through. My name is Jean from Linux.org. First of all, let's have a look what Zorin OS is actually about. Zorin OS is also an Ubuntu derivate, so it is very similar to Linux Mint and has very similar goals like Linux Mint. They want to produce a very user-friendly and nice-looking Windows or Mac OS alternative, which is faster, powerful, secure, and so on. Yeah, just Linux, but very user-friendly for new beginners. And I would say at the first glance, Zorin OS looks great, looks astonishing. If we are comparing it to this Linux Mint instance, for example, yeah, this Linux Mint is also kind of okay and also have a lot of features, but yeah, Zorin OS has the better appearance if we directly compare it to Linux Mint. But as we all know, the outer layer isn't everything also with Linux distributions. So let's go a bit deeper in this. To the first points I really like about Zorin OS, and Zorin OS is actually doing better than Linux Mint. And this is, I would say, the start menu. The start menu of Zorin OS is a bit more functional. You have a very great search here. If we type in some letters, we see all installed applications. We see some settings we can open up. We can also see some files, okay. But then it's getting really crazy. We see some characters, clocks, but also software we can install. And this is quite cool. And Linux Mint does have a similar search, but not as detailed like in Zorin OS. So if I type in here something, we see all settings, of course, all installed applications, also some folders if we have some, and so on. This is okay, but we see no software we could install later back again. And there's also nothing like a Google search, or we have it, for example, in Windows 11. But this is okay for Linux. We don't need this. In the end, I would say if we compare the menus of these both distributions, then Zorin OS gets really a point. But I would also say all Linux Mint users are completely fine with their app menu, and it has almost everything you need, I would say. Let's head over to another point, which is great. And I would say the user interface and the design on it, we already talked about it a bit. Yeah, it just looks quite more astonishing than this guy here. But it's also okay, I would say. Linux Mint did also many good things in the past to ramp up their visuals, but they are not as good looking than Zorin OS. For example, if we have a look to our workspaces here, this looks quite astonishing. We also have something like this in our Linux Mint. It's Alt F1 if we can open up here. It's also kind of okay, but yeah, if we compare it directly, then yeah, this looks quite nicer. On the paper, Zorin OS isn't as capable in desktop functions as Linux Mint, but to be fair, it looks quite better. And I would say if you want to get someone to use their new operating system, then yeah, this looks better. But let's get to other points, which are also very impressive. I didn't expect from Zorin OS. And this is, for example, if we open up some pictures here, for example, and I want to rename every picture, I can just select all the pictures I want to rename, right click it and select rename. Very cool. And here I can add something, for example, can find and replace and so on. This is very cool. This also works on Linux Mint, of course. On Linux Mint, it's almost a bit, I would say, more integrative and has more features than also here the Zorin OS mass rename function. But I really didn't expect it from Zorin OS. So yeah, this is a plus point. It has kind of deepness in their functionality, but as you see, there is almost everywhere fewer functionality than, for example, directly compared to Linux Mint. Also, another point which is kind of great, which also Linux Mint has, but I like that Zorin OS also doesn't have it if we speak of the snap packages as they are in Ubuntu installed by default. For example, if you open up Firefox in Ubuntu, you get a snap package. If you open up Thunderbird, you get a snap package. And this is a very, kind of proprietary format of Canonical, the developers behind Ubuntu and Zorin OS, and also Linux Mint are saying, no, we don't want to add this by default, or we don't want any apps by default with it. And this is also for Zorin OS. And this is great to know, I would say. And also a big plus point that both developer teams are doing, in my point of view, very good and well thought directions. And I would say these were all the good things I had to say about Zorin OS. And let us come to the next points where I don't really like Zorin OS, because as we saw it, for example, in our mass rename function, Zorin OS hasn't as many functions as Linux Mint. Just let's have a look at some few. One of the biggest point of Zorin OS is that Zorin OS is quite old. If we head over to our download page, then we get Zorin OS 17.2, and Zorin OS 17.2 is based on Ubuntu 22.4, not like Linux Mint, which is already based on Ubuntu 24.4. So its base is whole 2 years newer than in Zorin OS. And this could be a big problem in the future. And also, as we see in Zorin OS, they obviously have some trouble finishing the next Zorin OS function. Maybe it is about technical issues or also about manpower. This isn't a really good sign for Zorin OS and the future for Zorin OS. And I'm reminding at Elementary OS, maybe you remember it. Elementary OS had a great hype maybe about 5 or 10 years ago. And it was just like Mac OS, something like this. But now Elementary OS is also kind of old, because they had big trouble upgrading from Ubuntu 20.4 to 22.4, and I don't think that they already have Ubuntu 24.4 base out there. And this is also a very bad sign, because Elementary OS has not enough manpower to get all this working, and not enough also income, which makes it possible for the Elementary OS users. And maybe this is also kind of Zorin OS. Also, if we look, Zorin OS provides a Pro version. This doesn't have too much advantages to the core functionality, so you definitely don't have to buy Zorin OS Pro. But if you want to support the developers, then it's kind of a good thing to do this. But if we have a look, alternatives to over $5,000 of professional software, this isn't quite good. You should buy Zorin OS Pro if you want to support the development, or if you want some advanced productivity tools. But let's be honest, they don't have a too big impact compared, for example, to a Linux Mint. But the Pro version is kind of okay. If you want to support it, then definitely do this. But you don't actually have to. It is also just like in Linux Mint. If we have a look to Linux Mint, then we don't have any Pro version here. We can just download the full version. So this is kind of better, I would say. And if you want to donate and want to fund this project, they are also very dependent on funding. Then have a look to the Linux Mint donating page. This makes it really good. And if we have a look to it, the funding was always higher the last year than the month a year before, which is very great. And if you want to donate something to Linux Mint, you can also do it, but you don't have to, and this is for both systems. So Zorin OS has a kind of Pro version. They are more advertising it, and I guess it doesn't have a too big impact like the funding of Linux Mint. But I also have to say that Linux Mint is widely more used than, for example, Zorin OS. Let's head over to some other functionality I discovered by testing Zorin OS, and this is, for example, my guest editions. I have VirtualBox running here, and for getting all animations to work, this would be very nice for Zorin OS because Zorin OS has some really great animations. I didn't get them running. Before you want to get to install something, you have to install the guest editions from the CD you inserted into your virtual machine. And here we have the CD. And I can just select here run software, but then we see, yeah, there's nothing happening. So you have to install some additional CD software, for example, and then by your own. So just right click it, select open in terminal, and then you can start typing some terminal commands. Then this also will kind of work. But in the end, also after installing the VirtualBox drivers for my VirtualBox machine here, this doesn't work, and the VirtualBox drivers are not starting right. There is a kind of bug, maybe in the Zorin OS space, maybe in VirtualBox space, but in Linux Mint, this all works like a floor. I also have inserted the CD-ROM here, and I can just click open auto run prompt, and then I can very simply run this guy here, type in my password, and then this is going as expected, and also works quite well because you see, we have some animations here. This is just a small point. Another kind of small point is if we have a look to our file manager, and if we, for example, head over to our file system and we want to edit a file. You don't have to do this regularly, but for administrative tasks, it could be sometimes very helpful, especially for beginners with the Linux world, which aren't too used to using the terminal. So if I want to, for example, edit my etc hosts file, we have it here, I guess. Yeah, here it is. I can open up this folder here as root. So with this simple selection here, then I'm starting a file manager with elevated privileges. And then if I want to edit some files, then this is very easily possible. And we see it always, we have elevated privileges here. Very great and a very nice feature of Linux Mint. Also, if you don't have to use it too much. And if we compare it to Zorin OS, then we have nothing here. We can't really open some folders as administrator, not graphically yet. Also, just a small information. This file manager is the same file manager like in Ubuntu or Fedora. It's the GNOME file manager called Nautilus. This isn't too capable of many things. And if you want to make it more capable, then you have to install some add-ons afterwards and some extensions for your GNOME desktop. Then maybe this will get a bit more functional, but don't expect too much here. And you see it in many things. For example, if we have a look to Linux Mint, I really like one mode. Even Tuner from XFCE has it now, and this is the to list mode, or the extra pane mode here. We can select it by view or extra pane, also just with F3. Very great. So you get kind of a Midnight Commander style. You can also change to a list view on both sides, for example, and then we kind of have something like Midnight Commander. Very cool. You even can set this your default start screen. Just head over to Edit, Preferences, Behavior, and then we can start always in dual pane view here. This is great. And if we head over to Views back, then we can also find the list view as a default view. And then if I open up the file manager, it looks quite more productive. You don't have to use it, but you have the option to, and this is great. And this is with many other features you can very easily set here. And these are not included in Zorin OS or the file manager behind it. And this is kind of sad. You could install this file manager afterwards in Zorin OS, but it will never get so much integrated than the official file manager of Zorin OS. So I really recommend you using that file manager of your distribution or your desktop, which is recommending and which is the default one, because other ones there you will have much compatibility issues in many ways, and yeah, you want to use the default file manager for your Linux distribution. This is kind of unspoken law, I would say, and what I would really recommend, because otherwise, yeah, you are messing many things up afterwards. This is it to the file manager. Also, other things are kind of sad. For example, you can't really create some starters on your desktop, for example, or you can't really create some very simple scripts which are runnable. There is an option with Zorin OS though. So if you right click the menu, you can also select edit menu, and you can create a new item in some category, for example, as a source, the new item. Then you have something like, yeah, name, command, comment, and so on. This is quite okay, but also if you have a look at choosing an icon, yeah, have fun choosing your icon. In Linux Mint, if we create a starter in here, I select edit menu, right click edit menu, then select new item, and then I have all my icon preview. I can search for an icon, for example, let's search for FI. We see Firelight, FileZilla, Firefox, Firefox Developer, Firewall, and so on. We have all the default icons in here, which makes it really great. And they are also adapting with your icon theme if you're changing it later. So this is much more mature also in Linux Mint here than in Zorin OS, for example. And on both systems, you can select your very own image file if you want to. But this is also a small detail. And also, if you are on your desktop, you can really easily create a new launcher here. Very easy. This is just a launch application which isn't in your menu. Sometimes you want this, and yeah, such small convenience features are just included, and this is all batteries included in Linux Mint, and this makes it much more stronger than Zorin OS, which has some kind of functionality. It isn't too bad in these things, but on the other side, it isn't also really good. So I can't really recommend use Zorin OS also in such things. There are also some other things with the default software of Zorin OS. Just let's have a look on the text editor, for example. This is quite basic, so to say. We could just type anything here. It's great, for example, subscribe to Linux.org. Great, but you can't make it bigger, for example, very fast. You could change some things. You could also change the formatting, for example. This is quite okay. So it's much more capable than, for example, the default text editor in Windows. So yeah, you are really good on the Linux side with every text editor, and with almost every text editor you have just something like similar functionality like Notepad++. This is great, and on Linux Mint, but this text editor is a bit more better and much more integrated in the whole system. For example, if we have some favorites, they are showing up here. We have also some more options here. Very cool. Also some options I didn't know about. For example, check spelling. This is also included in Zorin OS, but there are other things which are not included. For example, an overview map, very helpful sometimes, but also larger or smaller text, very easily done. But let's choose the overview map here, and then if I type something in here, then we see this overview map of the whole document, if you can see here. And yeah, if the document gets longer and longer, then you see, yeah, a small overview map. Kind of helpful, but also some other things very easily integrated, just like yeah, zooming in and zooming out. Yeah, very easy. You can't do this in Zorin OS, for example. And these are all the small things which are not working in Zorin OS, which makes it to a kind of worse option to choose. And let us also head over to, for example, some settings. And here Linux Mint really shines. Maybe also a bit like KDE. Cinnamon has a lot of settings which we can choose. Not as much as KDE, but but much more than GNOME. Let's open up the preferences here, system settings it is called here. And then, for example, let's have a look to Windows. So we can define the title bar. Where do we want to have our buttons? For example, on the left side, we can have it like GNOME, so there is no minimize button, or some classic Mac and so on. Very cool. Also, you can define some actions. What are you doing? What are we doing if we, for example, double clicking our title bar? Do we want to minimize it? Do we want to open our menu if I double click it? And so on. Very cool. And yeah, you don't have such settings in Zorin OS. And yeah, this makes it a worse choice. If we have a look to our settings menu in Zorin OS, then yeah, we have something like, for example, multitasking, but we have not any functionality to do some more settings about the window behavior. But this is just an example. If we have a look, for example, on hot corners, if we go up on the left top corner here, then we open up our activities menu, which could be also very, very great. But in Linux Mint, if we head over to hot corners, for example, there I can configure all 4 hot corners, and I can also choose some other actions, for example, also a very custom command if I want. Very cool. And yeah, this makes it really capable of any things. For example, yeah, showing all windows. If I'm going now on the top left corner, then we have something similar like this. Yeah, very easy, very handy, and a much more functionality also in window settings here than in Zorin OS. Yeah, this is just an example. This is on many more features and settings between these both distributions. So this is it in overview to Zorin OS. So what should I say and what should I recommend you in the end if you are not sure if you want to use Zorin OS or, for example, Linux Mint? I would recommend you trying both. Zorin OS isn't a bad distribution itself, but it isn't as capable of everything like, for example, Linux Mint, I would say. It is a bit more capable than Ubuntu, I would say. It isn't a bad distribution, just to repeat it, but it isn't the distribution I recommend to any beginner out there who want to start with Linux. And instead with Linux Mint, I could recommend it almost to every beginner. Maybe if you want to just get into Linux in the cold water, then for example start with Arch Linux or something similar. But if you want a nice start, if you want to get almost, I would say, the best designed Linux distribution, also in terms of functionality, environment, for example, Linux Mint made its desktop on their very own. They made many apps themselves and they have a huge community instead of Zorin OS. So these are points to consider. And in the end, of course, it is your choice. Zorin OS isn't just a bad distro. It's also very usable, but it isn't just like a no-brainer you might have think of. And yeah, this is what I wanted to tell you with this video and what I also wanted to show you, of course. So what is your opinion about this? Which distribution are you using? And are you supporting my opinion and thinking? Or are you saying, hey, this guy is completely wrong? Just write it me into the comments. I would be happy to discuss a bit with you. And if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to this YouTube channel, because we from Linux.org publish new content about Linux and open source every week. So just make sure to don't miss them in the future, and see you in the next one. Bye.